Nature conservation is a strange thing in my view. The reason I think it is strange is because the concept of nature is complex. For simplicity's sake, I separate nature into two very distinct aspects. On the one hand, it concerns the diversity and variation of life, which you could see as the static part concerning the building blocks of nature. While on the other hand, nature has an aspect of process, evolution, dynamism, and adaptation, change. The total part of what we call nature means that the best building blocks are selected out of all the variation under the process we call natural selection. The best building blocks survive as they are best adapted to the new circumstances that nature throws at them. The reason nature conservation became a thing is that the amount of diversity and variation is rapidly reducing by human action, which means that there are far fewer building blocks available for natural selection to work on. We are concerned by the sheer decrease in number of species, and rightfully so in my mind. However, when we are talking about conservation, we always should remember that nature is also the dynamic part, as the natural selection will shape what building blocks and mutations will eventually make it. We might have trouble seeing this dynamism in the short time frame of our lifetimes, but in my mind we should never forget that it remains an essential part of nature. By over-managing, in other words, over-conserving, by regulating the natural environment and the species composition, we are effectively stopping natural selection and enforcing our own static selection criteria forced upon the natural substrate by our actions. We decide the building blocks, not nature. As I talk about wildcats on this channel, I will give some examples of over-management and unnatural selection in the big cat world, offset by some examples of where cats are still running wild. The most managed cat environments are probably found in South Africa, where by law reserves need to be fenced and wildlife viewing tourism is $1 billion industry. The picture and background look natural, but we have to wonder if it is. Reserves are relatively small and animals have nowhere to go if the reserve is hit by drought or other changes. Lions have a considerable value, and with game reserves of limited size, they only fit a limited number of lion prides. With the management wanting to maintain lions at maximum capacity, they will do everything to stabilize the natural environment. The lion prides do not go through natural takeovers by younger males. Natural dispersing males are sold off, while female groups are limited when expanding to too high a number. Equally, there's no starvation, extinction, or having to move out of the area during high periods of drought. Many areas are maintained with artificial waterholes pumped from underground sources. There's equally considerable veterinary assessment with vaccinations and rehabilitation. Equally, prey levels are augmented when they drop, as antelopes and bovines are also bought and sold. Lions therefore never have to respond to fluctuating prey, and there are even studies indicating that ungulates lead a much more stressful life within these smaller reserves compared to free and open expansive systems, able to redistribute themselves to areas with lower predation pressure. The lions in the reserve live under a regime of artificial selection, basically making sure the environment is constant prey, constant minimal competition, and minimal disease. This means they do not experience the natural selection crisis event that are the pivotal moments when selection pressure is at its highest. I will now provide some of the artificial selection pressures that these lion populations are exposed to. Frequent capture and transport will select towards individuals that can handle the stress of this, and thus being more docile might be a selective force. Equally, there will be a selection against any allergic reaction against anesthetic drugs, as that is a necessity for the transport. As monetary value of lions lies in their visual ability to please tourists, there is a selection for how they look, favoring large male lions with the Simba Mufasa look. And of course, they need to look healthy, so selection for lions that thrive and look healthy in a food plentiful, constant environment with year-round water supply. In the most extreme form of this management, we are creating farmed lions that just happen to have to catch their own food locked up within their own cage, and we make sure it's constantly available. Equally, we want lions that are highly habituated to people, potentially breeding out traits like shyness and carefulness, which are useful in the wild, where avoidance or caution against people is useful. Equally a trait that we would like to keep if we prefer lions to live in more wild environments and where shyness against people and interactions should be avoided. Let's move away from lions and take a look at the largest cat in the world, the tiger. Tigers are managed without fences and they can freely move. However, tiger habitat and thus protected areas are now confined to so few places, and they're mostly relatively small, meaning that tigers are effectively fenced in by human habitat. None of the populations are large enough to be self-sustaining, meaning there are not enough unrelated tigers within a given area to allow continuous interbreeding, as this would quickly cause pairing of highly related individuals. Dispersal between protected areas is absolutely necessary to assure natural self-sustaining breeding. What we mean here is that tigers are likely unable to live in the wild, with self-sustaining natural selection processes regulating their populations. They will unfortunately require management that will come close to the South African model, with management exchanges between populations. Initial relocations and exchanges are already happening in the largest conglomerates of the tiger population in India, resettling and repopulating new areas, with, for example, Sariska National Park having gone through an extinction event of tigers, first totally disappearing and subsequently repopulated with introductions. Eventually, when this reserve is at carrying capacity, the management dilemma will come in of the population requiring unrelated individuals and removal of young dispersers. This is simply necessary to sustain the diversity and variation of tigers here, the building block part, the diversity of tigers. This will, however, go at the cost of natural selection, with human-regulated selection forces replacing the natural ones. The third largest cat in the world is still free from human wildlife management of this sort. It is the jaguar in Latin America. The jaguar distributes itself across the continent according to availability of wild prey, and sometimes goes where we don't really want them to go, moving into areas with livestock. But that is not actually a human jaguar management strategy. That is a jaguar being opportunistic, making use of neighboring human-dominated landscapes. The cats are still very much connected with large conglomerates of connected habitat, with viable populations able to disperse and find mates, with natural selection fully regulating such processes. Although the jaguar experiences selection pressure from humans in terms of hunting of prey, the competition for food, habitat destruction, and the secondary consequences of replacement of herbivores by livestock, which jaguars subsequently hunt, they all fall within the realm of threats and the main conservation issues of the neotropics. The conservation paradigm for jaguars still concerns conservation of the building blocks, the jaguars themselves, habitat, prey, and jaguar individuals, within a dynamic natural environment which can sustain the species, meaning both aspects of nature in its fullest form. Jaguars are, in my mind, the largest real wildcat in the world. In this environment, humans have always hunted jaguars for profit, for body parts, pelt, teeth, bones, or even meat, for religious ceremony reasons, or hunting them as vermin when they are perceived as competitors, or simply seen as dangerous when they roam around rural communities. As the large ancient Latin American civilizations like the Mayans and the Incas all had relations with jaguars, both positive and negative, the jaguar has always lived with people, and where the two worlds collided, Where the rural neotropical world changed into wilderness, selection pressure towards avoidance of people might have made this big cat more secretive and shy, as people have lived around and with the cat for millennia. Having given examples of two extremes of cat management, I'm not stating here that one type of management is better than the other. Most of the high management types have grown out of necessity. The situation for tigers is truly dire, and free-ranging, truly wild populations might be a thing of the past in the high human density countries of Asia. With the increasing management of some cats, we do have to recognize that these create jobs and work for a considerable number of people working in conservation. For example, wildlife veterinary is a new scientific discipline that did not exist 40 to 50 years ago. Immobilization and transport of large mammals while trying to vaccinate species in protected areas, all this requires considerable expertise from a corps of highly educated experts. The number of ecologists monitoring and working in wildlife management is exponentially higher in high management countries like South Africa, indicating a scientific industry of expertise of managing and controlling nature. These relatively new fields of science and practitioners will have limited incentive to decrease management, as this will inadvertently mean a much lower need for experts. The more we manage nature, creating stable environments and maximizing nature's yields according to our own set biodiversity standards, the more people we need to implement these management regimes. And the closer the management regimes come to farming. Another outgrowth of high management and veterinary care concerns rehabilitation of wounded wildlife, with an exponential growth in establishment of rehabilitation centers, frequently positioning themselves as important components of conservation of species. However, data shows that rehabilitation of most species has limited to no impact on populations of such species. Apart from the few instances of critically endangered species, for which survival of every living individual becomes really important. The Iberian lynx is a good case in point. In most cases, individual animals ending up in rehabilitation centers can be described as young individuals dispersing away from patches of wilderness where populations are at carrying capacity, and the individual tries his luck somewhere else, ending up around people. It gets in trouble, and after rehabilitation is put back in the population that is already at maximum extent. Here I do not underestimate the welfare value of such endeavors, the compassion for welfare of animals shown by humanity, and the ability of humans to want to care for individuals in need. This is absolutely a good thing. I just question the conservation value in terms of a maintenance of biodiversity. High levels of management of target species by stabilizing environments, stabilizing prey numbers, stabilizing water availability, and the prevention of disease, it has a considerable positive effect on target population sizes. However, my question was not, is it positive? My question concerns, is it still nature? Is it still natural? I'm not answering this question. I just leave this hanging in the air, but it is a question. I do, however, wonder if an industry and discipline that has a high stake in maintaining increased management levels, once established, can objectively judge that things need to go back to less management of the environment. I therefore come back to my original question. Is nature conservation a strange thing? I think it is, as it seems to have a philosophical component on what you consider nature and what aspects you value and how far humans are part of it and the two worlds can mix. I personally have worked as a conservationist in the neotropics and thus have always admired the true wild jaguar, wanting to protect the last true king of the jungle. I prefer to move away from a world that moves closer to nature conservation as the Truman Show. It is fake, but it looks and feels real.